Something's different. Something's different in here. Is it? No, you're right. It is new coffee cup. Fellow, they make the best coffee mugs. Look at that gold with the black. How cool is that? No, you're right. It is the new paint. Yes, I changed the paint up in here a little bit. Hope it looks cool. I think it's going to. I like the new look. Got a few more things on the way to add just those final touches. But so far, so good. Anyways, what's up and welcome to a fresh new video. Today, we are going to flip the script a little bit and we're talking photos. I've been spending a lot of time talking A7S III. In fact, this video today is gonna be even a little bit light because the last one I did ended up to be like the end product was close to 30 minutes, took forever to shoot, took forever to edit, but it turned out to be a pretty good walkthrough of the A7S III settings, so I'll link that up top if you didn't get a chance to check that one out and you're curious to see how to set your camera up in the same way that I do for this style of filmmaking. Anyways, today is gonna be a little bit lighter, only a couple minutes long, and I wanna talk through my top 3 tips in Lightroom that I wish I knew when I was first starting out with photo editing. Now, I would like to choose a lot more than 3, but if I had to dwindle the list down to say, hey, these are the 3 that would make the biggest difference, these are what they would be. The first one, go light on the clarity slider. The second one, tone curve simplicity. And the third one, small adjustments, big outcomes. All right, so let's jump into Lightroom and I'm gonna show you exactly how to use those 3 tips. All right, so we're just gonna pick on one of these images. Let's go with this one. And there's the final image that I went through and edited. And the 3 tips we talked about earlier are going to work really well with this image. So let's reset this whole thing back to the raw file. Okay, so I'm just gonna pop on the quick baseline presets that I use for all of my images. There's the first one and the second one. And now we got something to work with here and just the tones that I like. So there's the before and after. Nowhere near a finished image, but we got something to work with here. All right, first tip was go light on the clarity slider. Biggest mistake I made when I first started out with editing was I felt like everything needed to be hyper clear. Essentially, the way I understand clarity is it's just the details of the image. And when you universally slide that whole thing up, you add clarity to the whole image, and when you bring it down, you take the clarity out so you can see that more of that blurry and that dreamy effect. So naturally, when I first started out with editing, I used to think that looked better. And though I would say that that looks way better than that, it is way too clear and parts of the image have some clarity that really shouldn't. So what I do with the clarity slider almost every single time in an edit is I typically bring it down. And how I just brought it down to -5 is actually, instead of trying to find a -5 with the slider, and double clicking actually brings the slider back to 0. Double click, bring it back to 0. What I do is I just hover over the actual arrow here and I use my down arrow and that does increments of 5s. So I usually bring it down by 5 and you might think, well, we don't want it to look like that dreamy effect, we want it to be clear. And the answer is yes, but only parts of it should be clear. So what I'm gonna do next, I'm gonna add spot clarity. And this is like the biggest tip for clarity for me, was don't universally add clarity. Instead, take universal clarity slightly out of the image, but we want to make sure, and I'm just gonna grab my brush here, I'm gonna go pretty quick, and I typically would do this a lot slower and a lot more precise, but for the sake of this video, just to get the point across, what I would do is I would spot add clarity to the things in the image that should be clear, and I might even add a little bit of clarity to this point that's in focus here, and maybe a little bit to the dumbbell. Tap O on the keyboard and I can see what I just painted. And from there, what I would do is I would double click my effect button to make sure no effects are turned on. And I would slowly start to add some clarity to those parts of the image, looking right about there, and that's probably coming in a little bit hot. I would slowly introduce some clarity back into the image in the areas that should have clarity. So that's what that would look like, and you can see the before and after of those spots that have some clarity added to them, as opposed to, let me just reset the whole image, drop my 2 presets back on here, and if I were just to add universal clarity to this whole thing, you start to get clarity in the foreground, these out of focus points that shouldn't have any clarity, that back wall is starting to get splashed up, that light looks kind of weird. This is just way too much clarity in this image. Okay, and for this second tip, let's go ahead and we reset this whole image and let's jump into the tone curve here. Now, if you have this option selected, you're gonna have a different looking tone curve than what I'm gonna be working with. Just make sure we have this RGB, this is your overall regular tone curve. Make sure this is selected. When I first started editing photos, I learned through watching tutorials much like this one to add an S curve to my images in the tone curve. By pulling the shadows down, by bringing the highlights up, this would create contrast in the image, which, let's turn this off and turn it back on. It clearly does create some contrast, and this nice curve of it allows for a really clean and smooth roll off between the shadows and the highlights, which is great. But after buying a lot of presets from creators that I really like the looks that they're getting and studying what they've been doing with all these channels, what I found is that a lot of them are going to be creating an S curve in these RGB separate channels as opposed to the universal channel, and it's gonna get a little bit of a different look. So what I'll do to do that is let's go ahead and we're gonna reset this channel. I'm gonna do the same thing in the red channel. I'm just gonna bring the shadows down a little bit, pop the highlights up slightly, and now this is the key. This is what I used to do. I would go into the green and I would try to get those exact same numbers. If you can see in the upper left way up here, obviously it doesn't look good, but you can see those numbers, they show values. So that's 63 and 49 on that point, and then on this red one here it's 51 and 36. So I would go back in and I would try to find that 51 and 36, and you can do it, it just takes a little bit of patience. But check this out, let's reset this channel. I'm gonna go back into red, I'm gonna right click and click on copy channel settings, go back on green, right click, paste channel settings. I now have the exact same S curve. Go into the blue channel, paste channel settings, and boom, what we now have is individual S curves in each channel, which I think does look better than adding a universal S curve. And what I do from there to achieve the contrast that I want is I actually just use this contrast slider up here. So once I go through all my other refinements throughout this image by doing some of my basic exposure things that I do, once I do that, what I can do with this macro slider for contrast is I can just increase and decrease it, and I don't have to go into my RGB settings to do that. I already have the look that I want coming from there, and I can change everything else up here. Other nice thing this allows you to do, if you want to create that faded image, you can just do that with the master tone curve, and I can pull my blacks up, I can bring my whites down, and then I can just make sure I get the contrast back in the image by flattening this curve out and getting more of that faded look if that's what you're going for. But in short, I just get a slight S curve on my red channel and I copy and paste that through the blue and through the greens, and then from there I'm gonna go through and make my adjustments. All right, and for point number 3 is the small adjustments, big outcomes. Let's reset our image again. What do I mean by that? If I just pop my presets back on here that I typically use, you can see in my sliders that these are really small adjustments that are being made. I'm not cranking things around where I'm pulling the shadows all the way up and dropping the highlights all the way down and smashing the exposure up. And obviously that doesn't look very good. Is that they're small adjustments and they go a really long way. It's natural to first get into Lightroom and start just cranking stuff around and thinking that more is better, but what you'll find, and I do have some fairly pushed things in here, but that's through a lot of experience and learning how to exactly do that. But the biggest area I used to make the mistake on these small adjustments, big outcomes, I would do big adjustments and think I was getting big outcomes, but it wouldn't look right, is down here under calibration. And I've noticed a lot of people are pushing these calibrations around. This is essentially telling the camera how to process colors. And as I'm pushing these around, you can start to see the before and after. It's subtle in this image, but if you look at the shoes, they go from, this is with all those calibration settings turned off, the shoes go from white and now they get this kind of this weird pink hue in them, which I don't like. So that's on, pink hue on the shoes, off with the white. And a lot of times you'll see tutorials that are explaining how this calibration panel can be really powerful and you can move a lot of stuff around and get certain tones. I don't mess with this at all. I used to, and I was always wondering how I was getting these weird pink hues and just these weird colors that I didn't love. So I actually leave this completely alone, and I do all of my color adjustments in the actual color panel, which brings me to my next point, is a lot of times when you're new, you'll start to do way too much in here. Again, small adjustments, big outcomes. You'll start to push these colors around to the point where they're not the colors that they originally were. Maybe I have a not so good of an image up here to be demonstrating what I'm talking about. Here, let's grab this one here. So if I were to take this image here, I can essentially take that orange and I can make it a completely different color pretty fast. And imagine that's a skin tone. You can mess things up pretty quickly by sliding these around way too much. So back to our image here, what you see is that there's smaller adjustments that are being made that create big outcomes. So I guess I'm really saying with the small adjustments, big outcomes is simply that. When you're new, you want to try to do way too much. And I encourage you, if you're just starting out, it's normal. Like I did it. I started out, I was cranking stuff around. I was wondering why my images never quite looked that good. At least I thought they did for like 5 minutes. And then afterwards I was like, these look way too over processed. They just don't look natural. And the natural kind of learning curve of this whole thing is toward the end, you start to do less and less, but doing the right things. And so those are my 3 tips that I hope can help you out. First one is go light on the clarity slider, and in fact, probably just do some spot clarity on the things that should be clear. Second one, keep it simple with the tone curve. Is just add the small S curve to each channel using the copy and paste feature. And the third one, small adjustments, big outcomes. Don't try to do too much and your images are gonna look way better. And in follow-up to those 3 tips, I will be shooting a video of my entire process for editing in Lightroom. I expect that one to be a little bit longer. Intention today was to keep it a little bit more light. Hope you enjoyed this. If you found any value in it, please tap that thumbs up button down below. But that's gonna do it for me. My name is Sean DeWispelaire. This channel is all about the skills behind the art of creativity, photo, video, editing, gear, all of those things. And me being full-time in the fitness industry, it's always gonna have a bit of a fitness feel to it. So if that's something that you're into, hit the subscribe button down below and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care. See ya.